So how y'all doing? This is Brian Eady sitting here with my father Ronald Eady, and I've been on my little voyage here in California, starting with the funeral of Uncle Melvin, and ending here in his house. About to take off from Oakland back to Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a matter of hours. But I wanted to get him on video camera, and I failed to do so all this time because we just been hanging out, having a great time, right? So I want to get you on camera, really telling your story about where you're from. You know, a
Well,
little
in
bit about you.
1942, I was born in Chicago. I was born a year and a half after my sister, and I was born at Providence Hospital. And I remember going back and forth to Providence because when I was young, I had asthma. And my mother always told me when I got old enough that the doctor told her that there wasn't a cure, and the only thing we could give him would be penicillin. But as the years grew, uh, I guess the medicine got better and I got better. So on my 10th birthday, the same doctor told my mother, well, I'm going to say if he gets to be 21, he'll be very, very lucky. And as you can see, I'm 71 years old now and still kicking.
Still kicking, huh?
Yep, still kicking.
So growing up in Chicago, what was like? You grew up in Chicago and spent some time in Detroit. Tell us about the Chicago years. What was it like to be a young black man back then in Chicago?
Well, in Chicago, I went to grammar school with asthma, and it was snowing a lot of the times, and we had to walk to school.
Hmm.
And when I finally graduated from grammar school, I was one of the ones that they honored for never missing a day and never being late.
Hmm.
And I was almost a straight E student. 'Cause E was the top grade.
Hmm.
And when my father came up to my graduation, I had to make a speech.
Hmm.
And as I was making my speech, I looked at him and he was grinning from ear to ear.
Hmm.
And I heard him under, I don't know if he whispered it, but I could hear him say, "That's my son."
Right.
And that was one proud moment for me.
Hmm. Right. And why was that such a proud moment for you?
To have my father there and see him grinning from ear to ear.
Hmm.
Because all during my schooling, he never came to a teacher's meeting or he never came up to school.
Hmm.
And I don't know whether that hurt me or not, but I guess by then, fathers and mothers weren't, they weren't too much into their kids back then.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is they worked hard, hard work. And he would come home and he'd rest. And then in that environment, they usually go out at night.
Hmm.
So if he got his 4 hours of sleep in, he could usually hit the nightclubs.
Hmm.
And he was a outgoing person.
Right. So you're saying outgoing, that's to say the least. Curtis Eady. Now, did Curtis have a middle name, Dad?
Curtis Eady did not have a middle name.
Okay.
And he really didn't believe in middle names. But when my sister was born, my mother talked him into Charmaine because that was her first choice for her name. But they chose Rose.
Hmm.
My mother's name was Rose, my grandmother was named Rose, and her mother was named Rose. And when they all got together, and that wasn't for too long a period, they would call them the Four Roses. And that what sticks out in my mind.
Right. Yeah. So, what else do you remember? I mean, to try to capture like your history in like 15, 30 minutes is not possible. Probably need more time. But you know, some of the things you guys did as children. You guys played baseball.
Well, I remember getting into trouble because on my fifth or sixth birthday, my father bought me a 22 rifle. And one winter, when Christmas came everybody was, not everybody, but a lot of kids were out in the yard shooting their BB guns. And I didn't have a BB gun. So I ran back into the house and on the mantel sat my gun, and it was loaded. And I picked it up and took it outside, and I was aiming at kids, and I missed. And all of a
You were
sudden,
aiming at kids?
I was aiming at kids like it was a BB gun.
Right.
And I kept missing.
Right. And you were shooting?
I was shooting a gun. And
Wow.
then the squad car came along,
Wow.
and they saw me with that gun,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't believe it.
Right.
So they took me to jail,
Mm-hmm.
and when my father came home, they told him, "You're not getting that gun back, sir." And then at the jail, when my father walked in, I was eating ice cream because they thought I was the cutest kid. And that's no joke.
How old were you when that took place?
It was, I got it either my 5th or 6th birthday, and it was the very next Christmas.
So they thought you were the cutest kid in the police station.
Yeah.
And you had you eating ice cream.
Yeah, and I could have been one of the first serial killers if I had a good aim,
Mm-hmm.
and I would have been
You wouldn't have
killing.
even known.
I never knew the difference between a BB gun and a real gun.
So you have strong opinions on guns. Would you like
From
to
that
share?
moment on, through that mistake, I always said that when I grow up and have kids, I will not have a gun in my house. And to this day, I have not had a gun in my house. Because most people that have guns,
What about those BB guns I had?
well, I would make sure that they're a BB gun.
Right.
And we have one BB gun.
Didn't we have an elephant rifle in the house?
No, not an elephant rifle, not a gun, not
That
anything.
Claude Davis gave you or something?
No.
Yeah, I can attest to no weapons in the house. Just on mine.
And the
So-
thing is, with the BB guns, the year before I went out and took my BB gun, everybody would play, but they would have 2 or 3 coats on.
Mm-hmm.
So when you got shot with a BB gun, it didn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't aim at somebody's head.
But your gun, and how many times did you fire before you stopped?
I can't really say because that's been a long time ago.
Wow.
But I can remember sitting in the back seat of a squad car going to jail.
Could you imagine doing that today? What would happen?
Yeah, I could imagine.
Right. So you were
In
pretty
fact,
lucky
it
there.
happens a couple of times where a 5-year-old kid shot and killed his 2-year-old sister.
Right.
Because if it's in the house, kids have a way of finding things,
Mm-hmm.
and they're curious. And what's the use of having a gun in your house if you can't load it?
Right.
And we had a loaded gun in our house.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, every New Year's Eve, we would go out on the back porch and shoot the gun up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody ever said where that bullet was coming down at.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, people get shot from bullets that are fired in the air because they have to have a place to land. But we never thought about that.
So would you consider yourself you weren't a bad kid, right?
I was a mischievous kid.
Mischievous.
Yeah, because one day I saw a match and I said, I'm going to, my father would light it with one hand.
Right.
He flipped his fingernail across.
And
And
light a match.
Light a match. And I was practicing, and finally I got the box and I lit it and I set the curtains on fire.
Wow.
And my father came home and my mother was aware of it. A yellow kitchen. It was all black.
Wow.
And I remember my father painting the kitchen yellow again.
You almost burned down the
I almost
house.
burned down the house.
How old were you then?
I was about 6 or 7 years old. The idea that when parents do things around their kids, back then the kids would pick up on it and they would try to imitate it.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, I don't know if I got a whooping, but I would rather get a whooping than have my father stare at me with anger. Because that stare, it just goes right through you.
Right. Now you said you have Curtis, Bub. Like, what did Bub do?
Well, Bub was there when I was about 8 or 9. And what happened was, I don't know whether my father invited him in or he moved in. But they used to argue all the time. Both of them would drink. My father's favorite beer was Budweiser.
And Bub is Irving Eady.
Eady.
He's my great grandfather, my father's grandfather. So they would argue a lot.
And one night they got into it, and I saw my father chase my grandfather out of the house, and the next thing I know, my grandfather had fallen down the steps. And I think he did it on his own because I don't believe my father pushed him, but he was running from my father. I don't know whether he had a gun or a knife after him. But I remember the ambulance was called, and believe it or not, 2 or 3 years later, we got enough money from that case to buy a house. And my father would always say to my grandfather that since he was partly responsible for it, that he should get half. And my father was a bully. So my grandfather says, I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to go and buy a house or a down payment on a house. And that'll be my contribution to me coming in your house, causing your family this kind of trouble.
Right.
So that's how we got our first home.
So growing up, was your dad like rough and tumble, like sweet and playful? Or
My father would walk down.
What did he teach you?
Well, he taught me things that you normally wouldn't teach a son. He taught me how to play cards. He taught me how to cheat. And he taught me how to gamble. And he always says, the first thing in cards you got to watch is people dealing from the bottom of the deck. And that would be his main thing. And he considered himself a smart guy.
What is a smart guy?
A smart guy is a guy that know all the ropes. He know all the angles. He knew the cops. He knew how to dodge them. He knew how to drink and drive and not get caught. And his thing was, no matter how drunk he was, he said he did not want to get out of the car if a policeman stopped him because he couldn't walk straight, but he sure can drive straight. So he would park the car and come home, but you could see him stagger.
Right.
And because his job was so rough, because he was a construction worker, and that's a hard job. And he had to work in the wintertime. That was even harder when they could. That he had to have an outlet. So he says, so he started drinking.
So is it true that Grandfather Curtis worked for Al Capone?
He told me when he was younger, when bootleg started, he had a wagon, and Al Capone was looking for kids to do his dirty work. So he would, with the food and stuff in his wagon, he would have some alcohol and stuff like that. And he would get like $2 or $3 from Al Capone and Al Capone's right-hand man. And they used to deliver bootleg whiskey. And he said he got caught a couple of times, but they couldn't do anything to him because of his age. And he said that's why Al Capone was so smart. He would always use somebody that if the cops caught him, they would get away with it. And he was taught at a young age, the worst thing you could do is squeal on people. Right. Nobody likes a rat. Right. And that's cops and the bad guys.
You mean the cops don't like a rat?
Because cops back then were just as crooked.
Right.
And most cops, they would pull over somebody and you could pay them off. You could offer them $100. They wouldn't write the ticket. But you had to make that suggestion. They couldn't actually come up to you and say, you give me $100, I'll tear up the ticket. But they would wait for you to offer something. And it wasn't a real bribe. They would say, you just contributed to the policeman's ball.
And you actually experienced a situation like that while driving, right?
Yeah, my father brought a deuce and a quarter, black, big Buick Electra 225. And he didn't like making payments on a car. So I had my first car was a 53 Plymouth. And I never did drive it because it was a stick shift. So when I bought it, I had to get the guy that sold it to me to bring it to my house, and he got a ride from some other kid or a teenager, and they drove it back home. So when we got a deuce and a quarter, the bill was $99 a month. And my father was always saying, these payments are killing me. You know, I don't like bills.
$100 a month for a car.
$100 a month for the top of the line, deuce and a quarter, brand spanking new Buick. So we switched. I gave him my car for free, and he gave me the car and payments.
How old were you then?
I was 17 or 18.
17, 18.
But one stipulation, that after 7 or 8 o'clock, he needed the car. He could get it anytime he wanted to get it. And we had a liquor store right around the corner, and my father was the type that liked to brag, and he would like to see that even if he wasn't using it, he wanted that car parked in front of the liquor store so his friends could see that either Kurt was there or Kurt had a brand new car. And one time I wanted to get the car, and I said, "You're not using it." That may be one of the few times I went to a liquor store. Now, this wasn't a liquor store. This was a bar. And a lot of bad people in bars. And they were drunk and stuff like that. Even my father was drunk. Sometimes he would be so drunk, because it was around the corner, he would walk home. And he'd tell me to go get the car in the morning. Or he'd tell me where the car was parked. And I would go get it.
And he would remember.
Yeah, he had a good memory, and he could drive drunk. But sometimes he got so blasted that, you know, he wouldn't take a chance on getting into the car. And one thing about my old man is I saw him, me and him were walking down the street one time. One of the few times we went for a walk. And if somebody got in his way, he would not move. He would make the other guy move out of his way. And this one big guy that didn't do that and said something bad to him, my father ran back and knocked him out and kept walking.
And your dad was how big?
He was 5'8", but he was strong. And most of the time when you have a fight, it's not who's bigger or stronger. It's who could stare down the other guy. You show courage. And he said the reason why he showed courage was he would walk up to the worst dog, German Shepherd or any kind of dog, and slap the dog. And he would enjoy just staring that dog down.
He would just go up to the dog and
dog and slap him on the nose.
Right. And not softly either, probably.
No, he just hit the dog, and the dog would make a funny sound just to show that he was tough.
Right.
And I can't remember when he was attacked by a dog. And he said, with animals, humans are smarter. It's just something in the eyes when you stare danger in the face.
So what did Curtis do for a living?
He was a bricklayer. His job was, when they started a job, they would pile up bricks in front of the place that they wanted to build a house. And all day long, that's all he did was load the wheelbarrow up with bricks. And you had to be strong to do that. And they had this board that would go up to the first and second floor, or to a scaffold. And he would have to push those bricks up. I went on a job with him one time, and he loaded up a half a barrel of bricks. And I can remember trying to get up that board, and the wheelbarrow would turn over. And he said, "You see how hard my job is, son?" And that made me appreciate work. And this was in the wintertime. And if you do 30 or 40 barrels a day, I mean, you have to be strong. And he'd be so tired, but he would always go out at night.
He'd go out at night.
He'd go out at
So
night.
was he like participating in different stuff to bring, like other businesses, or he was basically a bricklayer who liked to party?
He was a bricklayer because it paid better than most other jobs. And he didn't like to party. His way of going to a bar, not to dance and not to flirt, is just to drink and swap stories. That was his favorite thing to do, swap stories.
Now, where is he from originally?
He's from Little Rock, Arkansas.
Wow.
But when he would get drunk, he would always say small stone.
Small
Small stone. That's a little rock.
Little Rock.
Yeah, and people get it sometimes right away, and
Right.
they would have to think about it.
Right. So he was really smart.
He was, I wouldn't say smart. He was street smart.
Street smart.
Yeah.
So what's the fondest memory you have of your father?
The finest memory was we used to go out on a weekend and pick greens. We go to this field, and for 4 or 5 hours, we picked I don't know how many bags of greens. And when we got home, he would give half of them away. And that made me so mad. And he said, son, I'm trying to teach you how to share. And then sometimes we would go rabbit hunting. And we do things like that. But most of all, what he liked was fishing. Now, there was a time in the 50s when Emmett Till got killed. A gang of black kids came on the beach, and they said every white person that they saw, they were going to mess them up and throw them in the river. Well, my father had this guy from work that particular day. We went fishing, that you couldn't tell if he was black or white, and he really was black. And they approached him, and the next thing I knew, my father took out his pistol and just smacked this guy upside the head, and blood started coming out. And it was like 4 or 5 in that group. And instead of my father beating the rest of them, he took the guy home and he patched him up because he couldn't take him to the hospital or anything like that, because then it would have been a crime. And he told the guy, you can't retaliate because something in the South happens. You can't attack innocent people. And that guy that you were going to kill and throw in the lake, that was my best friend. And he's not white, he's black. And the guy kind of shook his head and apologized, and they respected my father for doing it like that. In fact, I think since we were the first group that these kids approached, they didn't get in any trouble. But they just weren't thinking. They were just mad.
So he saved somebody's life, huh?
He saved that guy's life that he hit because he was bleeding really bad. And he saved the life of the other people that he probably would attack.
Right.
Now, bring up a point. That following year or soon after, my stepmother took me to Selma, Alabama. And me not knowing the South and how bad they were down there, I remember getting on the bus, and the first thing I could think of, without thinking, I'm going to sit behind the driver's seat. And all the white people on there, I could see, like you could see their eyes getting big or shocked. And before I could get situated sitting down, she snatched me by the arm and just flung me like to the back of the bus.
Flung you.
It flung me. And she was mad because it was her fault for not telling me. But when you get on the bus, usually the people, somebody that's paying, the kid will run and get the seat first. Because that's what we were used to doing in Chicago. But I was so mad at her for snatching me. The first thing I did when we got back, or soon after, I told my father about it. And my father got so mad that he went out, he cussed her out, he went out, he got drunk, he came back later on that day and woke me up because I was sleeping. And when I went into the living room, he had her hanging from her feet out of the 3rd floor window. And I was so scared. And he said, don't you ever put my son in that position. He didn't say it in those certain words,
Right.
but you could tell how angry he was.
Right.
Because I was his heart.
He had her hanging out about.
He had the feet holding her out the window.
Wow.
And she was out. And because it was late at night, it wasn't a crowd, and I don't know if anybody saw it.
Right.
But, and when he brought her back in, they made up, and it was never a subject again.
Right.
But that's my dad.
So you was upset she snatched you back.
Yeah, because I had told
But
her.
you didn't realize you were in a place where they would kill little black boys.
Right. I was
Right.
too young to know about
Yeah.
something like that.
Right.
And he knew about the South.
Right.
And he would never go, like he said, he'd never go back to Arkansas
Mm-hmm.
to visit or anything because of the Klan or, you know, the
He
nerve
had
that he
escaped
had.
that.
Yeah.
He didn't
Well,
want to
he
go back to
was
that.
he was small when they moved to Chicago.
Right.
In fact, he was about your age when we moved to California.
Right.
But that's where he was born.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of prejudice in Chicago too,
Mm-hmm.
because my father would get stopped by the cop, and although he wouldn't say anything sassy or he wanted to live, he had that look on his face,
Mm-hmm.
and a cop knew whether or not to mess with him. And usually, you know, they either write the ticket or let him go.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about your mom?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she was beautiful. And my dad was a super jealous person. Because when I was old enough to remember, my mom took me to get some shoes. And the shoes were $3 or $4. And she got them for like $1. And he accused her of flirting with the shoe salesman.
Mm.
And that was the last time my mother ever took me to get any clothes again. And I don't know what brought that up, that she was flirting, but somehow he could look somebody in the, look at them and tell if they're lying or whatever. He just had that thing about him that if it happened and he asked you, you better not lie. And she finally told him that, yeah, the young fellow down at the shoe place, was flirting with her. That's why we got the shoes for $1 or something.
Right.
It was funny to her, but it made him jealous.
Right. Anything else?
There was a time when my sister was staying with us. We were on the second floor, and we had a porch, a nice porch. And that was when me and my sister stayed together. I can't remember a time that we were staying together, or she was visiting, or we lived together. But her boyfriend would knock on the back door at like 2 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the morning, and she would sneak out. And she would do this constantly, until it caught up with her, because that's how she became pregnant. And my father would say to me, and I would always say, well, you told me you didn't like people that snitched or told. And that's why, you never heard a beep out of me. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because the very next, soon as school was out, my sister was sent to California to live. And that's when she had her first son. And the fellow that knocked her up, he eventually went to California.
So you have a lot of
memories.
Lots of memories.
Yes.
Yeah. And you also remember the gangs in Chicago.
Yeah.
Can you think there's a difference between the gangs today and the gangs back then? I think because they took out the leadership, it's just going crazy in Chicago. Because, I mean, how do you, first of all,
my
gang
impression
situation in Chicago, and then your impression of today's Chicago?
My impression of gangs when they first started was they respected some people. When we were walking to school, me and this neighbor of mine, we used to get kicked and beat up all the time because we refused to join their gang. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we put on 2 and 3 pair of pants, sweaters, jackets, and coats, mm-hmm. and made us look bigger. But when they didn't want to kick you in the face because you would report it, and they would always kick you in the stomach and the side. And one time we both fell down together on the sidewalk, and we looked at each other and just started laughing. Because every time it would hurt them more than it would hurt us. And then when we come back to the house, it wasn't anything like high fives or something, but we both acknowledged how smart
But
we
you
were.
guys had to do that for a while.
We did that in the wintertime and in the summertime,
Wow.
going to school.
So you just had to wear multiple clothes.
Multiple
every day.
clothes to ease the pain of getting. And we picked this up. I picked it up when the BB gun incident was, because I know if you wore more clothes and you got shot, you wouldn't get hurt if you had 2 or 3 jackets on.
Right. Now, what did Curtis think of that when you were doing that? Did
He
know?
never knew anything about it. We were scared to tell him because he would go after these gangs, and we didn't want that to happen.
Right.
Because my father always had a
So
gun in the house.
did they know you were Curtis's son?
No, my father was mostly away all the time,
Right.
even on weekends.
Right.
But it was just
So he didn't have a reputation to be like, oh, that's Curtis' son.
No, it was no
Right.
reputation.
Right. So so you were a printer.
Yeah, when I came out of high school, I won a scholarship in printing, and that was in a certain part of Illinois. I can't remember the name now, but it'll come to me. But one of my teachers says, I send you down. It was Carbondale, Illinois. He said, we don't send our students on scholarships unless we could find them a place to live down there. And he said, because you're black and most of them are racist, I can't send you down there, but I can't tell you not to go. So I heard my father discuss it with my grandfather and called my mother and discussed it. And we decided instead of going to Carbondale, which I had a scholarship for, they would send me to Detroit. And that's when Detroit came into my life.
Oh yeah, Detroit. So talk about Detroit.
I went to Detroit to go to school, Wayne State. And I think I got there about a month before enrollment. And that's when I had my first falling in love. I was hanging around with my cousin, and she always thought that I was a square and never been out. And she thought I was cute, and she introduced me to some of her girlfriends. But when you go to Detroit and stay at my Uncle Bishop's house, if you stayed there, you had to go to church. So after going to church for about 2 or 3 weeks, I met this girl. She lived in Ecorse, Michigan. So my cousin is something like an instigator. And she said, you should go to Ecorse and check this girl out and all that. So for some strange reason, I got a bus that says Ecorse. I got on the bus, and I was like a spring chicken. I didn't know anything about anything. And once I got there, I found out that she wanted me to take her out, but she had a boyfriend who was in a gang. And the only way she could get out of the house is that her father had to agree with whoever took her out. And since he thought I was a nice young man, I would take her out and we would go to a show, and next thing I know, here shows up the boyfriend. So she put her arms around me. I don't know what happened, but he got real jealous. So after the show let out, we went out to the back, and he said he was going to beat me to stew or something like that. And I I didn't take anything serious then. And I started smiling. He called me stupid. He called me all kind of names. And finally she said, well, if you beat him up, he won't be coming back out here to take me out again. And he said, oh, okay, that's cool. And he didn't shake my hand, but he did some kind of gesture that showed me that for now you're safe.
Right.
And then that's how I got steady going to Ecorse, Michigan, meeting this girl, sharing her with this gang member or whatever. And next thing I know, it was like October.
Right.
And my father called me and said, how's school, son?
Right.
And I said, oh, I forgot about registering. I forgot about doing anything.
Wow.
And he said, well, you ready for me to come back and pick you up? And I said, no, let me stay until the next semester starts up. And he says, no, I'm coming to get you. So he got in his car and he drove 197 miles. That's how far Chicago was from Detroit. And he came to pick me up, and I, for some reason, started crying because I thought about the girl. I thought about the life. I wasn't used to having fun like that and going out and going to church.
So you having a good time in Detroit?
I was having a good time. And my Uncle Bishop talked my father into letting me stay. And he said, and he kind of said in jest, I'll see that he enrolls in school when the next semester comes. Well, the same thing happened the next semester. I didn't go to enrollment. I didn't enroll in school. And my father, through another uncle that lived in Detroit, was coming to Chicago. He said, you get in the car with him, bring all your things, you're coming back home. And that's when I came back home. And I didn't realize how he missed me. Because my father had been separated from my mother, and then he was separated from my stepmother. And every time I would talk to him, he would tell me how lonely he was and how he missed me and stuff like that. So that's the story of Detroit.
So, present day, what kind of things are you into?
Oh, I love the computer, and I love my smart TV, and I love doing things that mostly is free to do. And I can stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning on my laptop or my computer making movies or tapes. I copy movies that I probably never watch, but it's just so much fun copying. And certain programs like 24 and Dexter and programs like that.
Now, why do they call you the Tape King?
Because every time I get extra money, I go buy blank tapes and I tape. Plus, I know how to go from VHS to DVD, and I probably went from before VHS was introduced, we had cassettes, and I could do cassettes. In fact, that's a funny thing about cassettes. Because when the cassettes came out, we couldn't think of anything that would be any better than cassettes. And then how the world progresses, there's always something better that somebody's improving on. And you could bet that whatever we got today, in 10 or 15 years, they'll have something better, something easier.
Yeah, all the time. Because you've had satellites, those big, before they had DVDs, they used to play on the big record.
Yeah, I had they were called reel to reel. Now they had reel to reel. I used to be into music because when I went to Detroit, I met I was there at the Grand when they had the Temptations and Marvin Gaye and Smokey Robinson.
That's when you was hanging out.
That's
huh?
when I was hanging out having fun. We go to a place called the 20 Grand.
Oh yeah, that's
And
a
even
famous
though I
club.
didn't dance, I just enjoyed the music.
So you would be in there seeing these guys live.
I would see them live.
Multiple
And that's
times.
when, that was before they were famous.
Right.
And they would come into the crowd, and after 3 or 4 minutes on stage, because they didn't, performers today do 30 and 40 minutes.
Right.
They just come in and do
a song.
do a couple of songs that was a hit at that particular time.
Right.
And then they would go into the crowd, look for the nicest women or the finest women they could find and dance with.
Right.
And they didn't care if they were with somebody. That's how bold they were. And usually if they took on somebody that wanted to fight back, the crowd wouldn't let them fight back.
Right.
They would say, oh, go let your woman dance with Smokey or, whoever it was.
Were you ever a victim of the Motown guys? They ever come by and snatch your date?
Well, I never did dance, so I didn't have that problem. And we would always go in the back in the corner and be smooching or something like that.
Smooching.
Yeah. And the only time I tried to get up and dance is when all the lights went out. And, I was probably got some kind of thing about looking stupid when you dance. So if the lights weren't out, I wouldn't get up and dance.
And you got a son who dance all the time.
Yeah. It's something about rhythm.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, I never had that rhythm.
Yeah. I got rhythm. I don't know where I got it from.
You got it from your mother.
Yeah. I got the music from him, though, and all the entertainment.
videoing, editing, all this from this guy right here. We're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Time to head to the airport. See you guys on the other side. Love you, Dad. Thanks for
Well,
coming with
today
me.
is a bad day for me because I'm losing my son again.
Yeah.
And about 12 years
He
ago,
asked, do he call me though?
yeah, it's like when your son is moving back to some place where you can't see him. It's like he's going off, either to school or, I hate to say it, prison. But I can imagine how a father feels if he had a bad son who went to prison. But thank God for my son that he never got in any trouble. I never got in any trouble. And you just have to respect other people's space. And when somebody makes you mad, you walk away.
Because with the father you had, you could have been one on the wrong road yourself, huh?
Yeah, it was so easy back then. All I had to do when the gang approached me is say, I've been beaten up a number of times, I'll join. And that's the last place I wanted to, be, was in a gang.
Right.
And that's about it. I love you, son.
Love you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Yes.